Tonight, we head to Capitol Hill, where congressional lawmakers are still working to try and hammer out a $1 trillion budget deal. That after House Republicans got a couple of unwelcome surprises into the bill that Democrats are none too happy about. And now it turns out neither are Republicans, but for much different reasons. Lawmakers, they have till midnight tonight to get a deal, or the nation could be hit with yet another government shutdown. And CIA Director John Brennan speaking out in defense of his agency. This is a scathing torture report is released by the Senate. Democrats, they say that the horrific abuse against detainees is a history of replacing itself and against American interests. Do the government leaders not learn anything from the Church Committee? Our panel will weigh in. Plus, Ed Mullins, he's president of the Sergeants Benevolent Association. He spoke exclusively to Dominic about police-community relations, and he doesn't hold back on his disapproval towards one mayor, Bill de Blasio, who he believes has thrown police under the bus.
When the mayor talks about his son is not a kid from East New York or East Flatbush, where there's double-digit homicides in the course of the year.
All right, we're going to get to that in a little bit here. Good evening and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French, and thank you so much for joining us. We start, though, tonight in Washington, where, let's be straight, we thought today was a pro forma day. They'd do some extension here. We'd get the basic budget done, and we'd push it through. Not so fast. All of a sudden, we need to keep our eyes on the clock once again. The current budget deal, the thing that prevents the government from closing its doors, remember that? Well, it expires at midnight tonight, and what looked like a done deal, as I said in Congress, to prevent another lockout is, right now, anything but a done deal. Let's get the very latest from senior political correspondent Andrew Whitman.
And Rich, most watchers expected Congress to pass this bill this afternoon, and the Senate would pass it tonight. But right now, nobody seems to know what will happen next. House was expected to vote at 2 this afternoon, but a procedural vote only passed by 1 vote, and members on both sides voted no for their own reasons. That prompted the White House to issue a statement supporting the $1 trillion spending bill, but it was rather tepid support, essentially saying the president would hold his nose and sign it, even though he opposes some items in it. But then the top Democrat in the House, Nancy Pelosi, took to the floor, blasting the bill, blasting the GOP, and surprisingly blasting the White House.
Here we are in the House being blackmailed to vote for an appropriations bill. I'm not asking anybody to vote one way or another. I'm just telling you why I would not put the name of my constituents in my district next to a bill that does, as the president says, weaken a critical component of financial system reform aimed at reducing taxpayer risk. I'm enormously disappointed that the White House feels that the only way they can get a bill is to go along with this, and that would be the only reason I think they would say they would sign such a bill.
The House then recessed and has not returned since, nor have they rescheduled the vote. Interestingly, that split among Democrats seems to be widening tonight, with the White House whipping votes for the spending bill and Pelosi whipping votes against it. Since both sides want to avoid a shutdown, it's likely we'll see one of 2 resolutions. One, a short-term budget extension. Right now, that looks like it would be for 2 days to allow negotiations to continue. The other far less likely scenario is that Republicans give up on a couple of late additions to the bill, which are the things that Democrats most vehemently oppose. That includes a major expansion of campaign donation limits to political parties. The current deal would raise the ceiling 1,000% from current levels, from $32,000 to $320,000. The other is a major change in Wall Street regulations, specifically on derivatives, the same derivatives many say triggered the financial crisis in 2008. The bill would essentially allow major banks to engineer derivative trades so they could be insured by the FDIC, meaning any potential losses they experience would be paid for by taxpayers. Rich?
All right, a couple questions, Andrew, and then we'll bring in the panel. Republicans actually have oppositions to the bill as currently constituted. So it's not like anybody's happy with this. Usually it's a sign of a good deal, but Republicans' objections for far different reasons.
Yeah, Republicans don't think the bill is strong enough against the White House, particularly for his the president's executive actions on immigrations. They think there are more steps that can and should be taken that are more punitive to the White House. So it's not a full voting block of Republicans, and Republicans have not been able to count on the Democrats to cross over like they have so many times before since John Boehner took over the House. So there just aren't the votes there. By some estimates, they might be 50 votes short.
In the question why the White House goes along, I heard the press secretary today saying, president doesn't love all this, but it's not so bad. That doesn't sound like a ringing endorsement.
Those last two items that I mentioned on derivatives and the other stuff, the White House doesn't like that either. But they figure, A, they got to keep the government running, so they'll support a deal that just goes along to get along. And B, they realize if this thing gets kicked into January and you get the new Congress where Republicans control the Senate, odds are Democrats will get a deal that's not as good or contains even more items in it that they don't like. So I think they're figuring that they can minimize their losses by agreeing to a deal today.
All right, let's bring in our panel. A couple familiar faces, of course. Richard Brodsky, former Democratic New York State Assemblyman, now senior fellow at Demos, professor at NYU, and Dominic Carter, political journalist and author, and obviously I met Andrew Whitman. And Richard, you've been involved in a couple late-night negotiations on budgets. It's about leverage. It's about who believes they've got the stronger hand to play.
It's also about a momentum. And when a deal like this starts to unravel, because no one's happy with it, and they're not happy with it on the merits, and they're not happy with it on the politics. Putting all that aside, when the deal starts to unravel, it has a momentum of its own. There's an old expression, the hardest thing in the world is to get a legislative body moving in a direction. The second hardest is to stop it once it's there. That's what's going on here. What's important about this, aside from the vote itself tonight, is that this is a sign of things to come. And what tonight means is the Republicans cannot cobble together a governing majority, and they need Democrats. Well, if that's what's going to happen over the course of time, the Democrats are going to learn how to use that leverage to bring them back. And Boehner is going to face a decision. Does he govern purely with Republicans? Does he govern with a coalition of Democrats and Republicans? And if he does that, does he create civil war in his own party?
Where I'm a little surprised is we didn't even get into, Andrew didn't have time to get into the other cuts. I mean, the First Lady's signature thing about the school lunches and all that, that's being cut here. And there's a bunch of other cuts that are going on. But derivatives? I mean, it's not like you got to go back in the history books. This happened in 2008.
If you want to get crazy,
this is nuts.
It's the single craziest of the crazy stuff, the Republican crazy stuff, is the increase in contributions to the parties. I mean, if there's anything that the public thinks, it's that the large corporations have too much influence. The first thing you do when you get a governing majority, I mean, to some extent, they're putting this in this bill because this will have Democratic fingerprints on it.
But see, for me,
there's plenty of crazy stuff.
For me, Dominic, Rich 100% right in terms of how the political contributions. But I hazard to say the general public, they feel that ship sailed. You know, people are buying elections all over the place, whether it's fair or not, you get their perception. But everybody thinks that what happened in 2008 should have been preventable. Not enough people, there weren't enough watchdogs looking out for the regular guy, and who got bailed out and who didn't. Everybody knows that story, even if they don't read a newspaper. So the idea right now that we're going to unwind just 6 years later the regulations, not even, that put the minimal amount of safeguards here to say, you know what, there is such thing as not too big to fail anymore, too big to, we're going to finally change this. That they want to roll that back in the first thing, I think the president misreads the public that they just want anything. I think he could play a tougher hand.
I don't know about that, Richard. What you're referring to was the weakening of Dodd-Frank. We all are aware of it. And I agree with Richard Brodsky. What we're seeing now is almost indicative of what's right around the corner, what we're going to see as soon as the Republicans take over. And I'm quoting somebody famous. I think you said at the top of the show, this is nuts. This is a sign of what's to come. And I don't know if the president necessarily has a stronger hand to play. As Andrew said, he's got to take what he can get now, because come next year, it's a whole new
let me ask you, Andrew.
This deal is Boehner.
If
he can't get this deal through, he won't be able to get anything through next year. The
He'll
leadership,
have more votes next year. He'll have more members.
The members he'll have are further to the right.
No, I
than the
understand
members
that, but he won't need Democratic votes. He's hoping as badly as he needs
Well,
them
the
for
White
this
House,
right
though,
now.
Andrew, made a calculation that said, they came back with this thing, and they said, my God, this thing, are you kidding me? And as you said aptly, they went along to get along. However, if he believes that they're really willing to go over a cliff the second time, we know who got blamed the first time. You believe it's too nuanced an explanation for the American public for the president to say, listen, I don't like a whole bunch of stuff that's in this, but you know what? I'm going to believe in compromise. I know what happened in November, but over my dead body, will I go back and let Wall Street get a free pass here where the rest of you, are going to be looking at foreclosures again if this thing goes down the toilet? I won't do it. You really think that if he makes that simple, accurate appeal to the public, they're going to blame the White House and not Republicans for shutting the government down?
Here's the problem. He only has one weapon available at his disposal right now. If this bill passes the House and then passes a democratically controlled Senate and he vetoes it, he's using that veto stamp to shut the government down. And as much as Republicans tried to blame Democrats for shutting down the government a couple of years ago, most voters assumed, and I think correctly so, that it was Republicans who had their fingerprints on that. Obama, I think, is calculating, I can't be seen as the guy who shut the government down.
I'm up against the first break. Do you both agree with Andrew here that the public will blame Democrats and the president here if this thing would go into shutdown number 2?
In the end, the president gets the blame for everything.
Agreed, but the best thing that may happen to the Democrats is that the Republicans have control now. And I'm referring to the presidential election because they may play themselves so much, it may boomerang against them.
I'm going to read my columns again, huh?
Maybe, allegedly,
possibly.
A long time between now
Yeah,
and then.
at the risk of getting away from politics, just policy, the next person who convinced me it's good policy for this country to, again, deregulate derivatives and to let as much money flow in as possible back into politics, please explain that one to me. All right, when we come back, the other huge issue that was on the national radar today, the CIA Director John Brennan defending his agency with caveats following the release of a damaging torture report detailing acts of horrific abuse against not only detainees under the Bush administration, but also real honest questions about transparency. After the break, you're going to hear from national security expert who weighs in on whether she believes laws were broken and whether the administration misled Congress. We'll be right back.